Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Global Supply Chain Practice Head for Morgan Phillips Executive Search. Today I'm happy to have with us Dr. Wolfgang Baier, Group CEO of Luxasia. Luxasia is one of the largest regional distributors of over 150 international beauty and luxury lifestyle brands, such as Clarins, Estee Lauder, Ferragamo, Hermes and Shiseido, and they also have joint ventures with the Coty Group, the Louis Vuitton and Hermes Group, and Elizabeth Arden. Present in 15 Asia-Pacific countries and hiring more than 2,000 full-time employees, Luxasia aims to define a new omnichannel experience in the beauty industry in Asia. Dr. Wolfgang Baier has been the Group CEO of Luxasia since August 2016. He joined on a mission to transform the company from being the leading Asia beauty distributor into a lifestyle omnichannel leader, adding e-commerce and new industry capabilities to the brick-and-mortar foundation. Prior to this, Dr. Baier was the Group CEO of Singapore Post from 2011 to 2016. He successfully led the transformation of the Singapore Post Group from a traditional postal service into non-mail businesses such as logistics, retail and e-commerce, and managed to accelerate its global expansion. This resulted in a significant increase of the share price. Before that, Wolfgang also worked for more than 10 years in the top consulting firm McKinsey & Company in Europe and in Asia, was a partner of the Singapore office leading the transportation and logistics as well as operations activities in Southeast Asia. Wolfgang, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Fantastic, happy to be here.
So let's start with the fun question, right? How many fragrances do you use now, and how many did you used to use before joining Luxasia?
Indeed, before I joined, I had maybe one or two fragrances once in a while, and I would say I must have more than 25, 30 fragrances now, because first of all, I want to try all our brands, and understand the heritage. And then once you really fall in love with fragrances, it's very hard to stop. It becomes a little bit like a collector's item. Wherever you smell something new, you want to have it, so I'm a bit infected.
Yes, it catches you. You caught the bug, right?
Yes, exactly.
When you joined 2 years ago, Luxasia, the group was already pretty much leading in brick and mortar, right? And you shared from the beginning that you wanted to focus more on e-commerce. Now, how has that focus changed the business so far, 2 years into it?
Well, it clearly has changed because we're now 2 years on our transformation to really kind of go much more into omnichannel retail. And I think that's the key word for us also. It's not e-commerce on one side and retail on the other. It needs to merge together. And so what we have been doing is quite a lot of things that I call typically under the hood, which means things that are not that visible to the outside. We have basically gotten our finance systems really in good shape. We have gotten all our HR systems now more and more into shape. We work on our supply chain. All our warehouses, we run our own warehouses, are now e-commerce ready, B2C and B2B. And the list goes on. Technology, order management systems, everything which we put in place so that we can now have the capability to work with our brands online, offline, and always have the consumer in the middle at heart. And on the topic of consumer, we partnered with Salesforce.com, where we basically now rolled out kind of Salesforce across all our platforms with our brands, which means we can start to identify consumers online, offline, and then give them really what they want.
So really putting the consumer at the heart of what you do. And you mentioned also that using only e-commerce in the beauty industry would not work, right? Because consumers...
It's difficult. It is very difficult, because one is obviously kind of, when you look at skincare products, they still want to try the texture, and the smell of it. For fragrance, the smelling is still an important part of the discovery. And for makeup cosmetics, it's basically mostly seeing kind of how it looks on your own skin tone. Yes, the technology evolving, that kind of, you have these magic mirrors and lots of apps that can show you, but nothing still beats kind of the real experience. We see two segments in e-commerce. One are the price seekers, people that really look basically for the product and find the cheapest product. This is a segment which is not that easy to work with as official distributor, where we keep up the retail prices. And then we see the true beauty lovers who love to find new areas, kind of innovation, and really like to go deeper into the history. And those people you can then invite for events, but then do the purchase online, basically do repeat purchases online, because once people know the products, then it's very easy to go online, but I think that first first discovery still has to have a physical touch.
Yes. And you speak a lot about omnichannel, right? Of Luxasia. How does and how does it feel and look like an omnichannel experience trademark Luxasia?
Well, we have over 150 brands now. So kind of for each brand, actually, our omni experience looks a little bit different, And at the core, and we mentioned before, is the consumer. The consumer, the Asian consumer that goes out and wants to buy a beauty product. And then we need to make sure that wherever the consumer looks, we need to have a touch point. That could be in a department store, that can be in a chain store, that could be in a perfumery, that could be on a marketplace somewhere, on an electronic marketplace, that could be on one of the brand sites, or that could be on luxasia.com itself. And so we need to make sure that whenever we see that interest, we basically channel it into kind of the system and make sure that kind of that consumer is then really taken care of. It doesn't work always, but I think we're improving step by step and learning a lot on how you really kind of make those journeys for those consumer enjoyable. When they first experience something, so what's the time frame that you want to trigger them again to try something? Do you send them some samples? Do you send them online, and so forth? So there's a lot of those things that basically for the consumer, it's almost invisible, but it should be almost in the future, so I hope, with artificial intelligence to anticipate what they're looking at. Once we have enough data points, which obviously after a year we don't have yet, we should be able to cluster consumers and say, hey, actually this kind of consumer is kind of a true beauty lover and kind of is going, when they buy a fragrance, you can also kind of offer them potentially some of the adjacent products. You can see whether they like some of the other skincare and so forth, so that you start basically anticipating the wishes of the consumer and really help them in that beauty journey.
Yes. And probably it's a good idea if you manage to also kind of anticipate when they run out of stock, right? So it's
very important.
Like replenishing their...
It's huge, We have about 20,000 SKUs, and they're very, very different in the way basically they behave. Some are long-term, no expiry, to some are just seasonal, 2 months, some are promotional. You have the gifts that you give to purchases, we have the stocks that we get in just for testers. So there's a lot of different areas, and so our supply chain is pretty complex. And the more we understand about the consumers, the more we can anticipate kind of how certain events work, kind of the better we can plan for our supply chain and avoid, not only overstocks, but also stock outs, which then would be lost sales.
Yes. And what do you see as because again, Asia is a little bit of a different market, and it's a lot of different markets in itself compared to, for example, Europe or America. Do you see certain regional trends in the beauty industry, in the e-commerce segment, that are particular to Asia?
Yes, I think overall you see clear trends in different kind of ways how consumers appreciate fragrances. So that Southeast Asia, for example, is looking more for heavier fragrances, versus the further you go into the north, it's lighter fragrances. The same is for skincare. Here in the tropics, it needs to be very light skincare. It can't be too oily because you can't wear it. And I think the same is true, I think, when you look at those brands that are represented in e-commerce. Obviously, for example, in China, there's a very well-established kind of e-commerce ecosystem with Alibaba, with WeChat, and everyone else, kind of really producing. Versus in quite a few countries here in Southeast Asia, it's still very nascent. In Philippines, there's a lot of social selling. In Indonesia, there are a couple of websites, but in beauty, not very well developed. Singapore is more developed. Malaysia is quite developed. But each of them has different players and different development stages. So it's quite interesting.
Yes. And do you see Luxasia going into different markets with a different aggressive or not so aggressive strategy?
Absolutely. So we have to. Because what we try to do is we want to create a simple backbone for Luxasia, where you have your supply chain, you have your CRM system on it, you have your back office systems, and then each country can basically adapt and touch into whatever they need for the market. A solution for Singapore would be very, very different compared to a solution in Vietnam.
Yes. So basically you can customize, you have the backbone which is fixed and offers the foundation, and then you can customize the approach to the market depending on the market conditions.
Even on the supply chain, and in our warehouses, because in some of the markets, labor cost is still very affordable. That is then basically where you don't put the fully super automated warehousing system with the robotics and everything in, but you basically scale it back. You still have the same information flow, but the physical flow is different. And so we clearly distinguish that along all the functions to say what's the best way to go out to basically make sure the consumer is at the heart, and then basically make sure we have the most efficient layout around.
And we got a question coming back to a little bit we discussed a little bit with this term which appeared recently, which is phygital, right? Which is basically the combination of the physical location, store location, and the digital world. And we have some examples of Burberry's, and they have, I think, retail theaters and magic mirrors in fitting rooms. You see Tommy Hilfiger, they have in-store virtual reality headsets. Obviously, for perfumes, it's much harder to do, right? But do you see such developments changing and basically shifting the developments of department stores all over the region?
Absolutely, because you can see consumers are looking for experiences. So just putting the bottles of perfumes or skincare or makeup is not enough anymore. So it's really about making sure you create an experience around it that can be kind of a cloud of the perfume. That could be workshops on the skincare. That could be true makeup artists on makeup. So basically putting more experience into retail, and then how do you get people excited about it? How to get input is via the digital, via the Instagram campaigns and all the digital campaigns that people know there's something happening. They can co-create, and then you put it together. And that's a classic example how basically both worlds come together.
Yes, so basically a combination of online and offline. And we touched a little bit upon it, but what are the areas where you find still a lot of room for improvement, as white spaces, if you may, in the industry?
For me, to be honest, I always see improvement. That's basically a trait I have. I think, first of all, let's start by the different function. I think in the back office, supply chains and the forecasting capabilities can always improve. I think once basically as an industry and also as a leading player, we are kind of much better equipped to judge new launches by the response on social media, by basically certain responses of consumers, and then basically put them into algorithm that allows you to know how much do I order now in advance, how much do I move, how quickly will the stock move. So I think there's a whole topic about forecasting and predictability of stock movements, taking into account social media and other kind of data points from region where it has already launched. I think that can help us. And when you look at the way you interact with the consumer, it can become much more personal in the future. It should become more personal. It should not be, kind of 5 clusters. It should be maybe kind of I'm overdoing a little bit, but it could be 1 million clusters. It should be the cluster of that consumer where you then draw insights, but at the end of the day, it needs to be very, very special to the person, very narrow. Exactly. And, then the way you basically interlink e-commerce and department stores and chain stores, there's also quite some breakage still in there because it's different platforms, obviously kind of chain stores are going more into integrated, but when people come to department stores, how do you now fully engage them on the way out and so forth. So I think along all the ways, all the different segments of the business, there's a lot that one can learn. What I always say is the most important is to have an open mind. And that's what we discuss with our team a lot, is because you can't really say where exactly the journey is going, but you need to try it out. And some ideas don't work, learn from it, move on. And I think with that, I think the whole industry and us also as a leading player in the industry, we really want to see that Asia over time takes a leading role, in beauty and how we basically treat the consumers in a really fully kind of physical and digital integrated way.
Mm-hmm. And we had a question to follow up on the point with supply chain and the backbone, right? We had a question also in terms of investments specifically for Singapore, because it's a relatively small size compared to the other Southeast Asian countries. What opportunities do you think e-commerce in Singapore provide to investors, and how would the market shape up in the future?
When I basically started to talk about e-commerce, it was about almost 10 years ago. At that time there was not a lot happening, and I think that also explained why at Singapore Post we had a really good run there, to move ahead, because it was really at the onstart. Since then, the landscape has developed a lot. You have very large players here. You have the largest players in the world with Alibaba, kind of with their subsidiary, with Amazon coming in, and you have the Q10s of the world, and you have a lot of small startups, you have brands. So I think that it's quite a vibrant e-commerce place. The fulfillment is also not a problem anymore, from the pop stations and the locker stations to house delivery. They're pretty cheap, affordable, lots of startups trying out. So I think that the landscape is right. I think what obviously you would like to have more of is obviously true entrepreneurs who are trying to push the boundaries, in e-commerce and also in Singapore and trying things out, And so I think overall the capacity is there. Singapore will always be, I think, is a very good launch pad for many of the e-commerce ideas for Southeast Asia, because you have absolute stability, very good talents, and obviously kind of you can try out a lot of things. But, in terms of scale, you then have to go very quickly into Southeast Asia, because, it is 5-6 million, and you want to have the 600 million. And so the thing is for us, if we would not have a regional footprint, we could not invest so much into Singapore, because we have all our special teams that's involved in Singapore, but they serve the whole region. And I think that's a very, very important focal point. When I also look at the e-commerce industry in Singapore, I think it's a fantastic test bed, but then it's important for all of those companies very quickly to scale up. Otherwise, you can't keep track on the investments because they will not pay off.
Yes. And actually, we had I'm not sure if you're familiar with this company called A-Commerce, which is a very interesting company. We had Paul, who was the CEO on the podcast, and he was actually arguing that it's better for companies to start in a tough market, like he started in Thailand, because then you kind of you learn the ropes in a very tough environment, and then it's easier in some ways to scale in the other markets, because each of them has their own demographics and own set of drawbacks. You've been on the C-level, right, operationally, both as a brand owner and as a service provider for e-commerce. What's the biggest misconception or misplaced assumption that one side has on the other?
You mean between the brand and distributor, or?
Yes.
To be honest, we don't see that problem of misconception so much, because I think that may have been in the past, 10, 20 years ago. But by now, if the brand and the distributor don't work together to build a market and are really more or less market makers, the consumers will not buy it. So they're kind of trying to just sell something and hard selling something, discounting things and putting it to different channels doesn't work anymore. The consumer wants a story, the consumer wants the original product, they want to have the right price. And so I think when we look at our partnerships, the ones that work by far best is the ones where we sit open table, fully transparent on cost structure and everything else on the table, and say, these are the consumers, this is how we would like to serve them, how do we make it happen together?
Yes, so partnership
exactly.
Model. Final question in terms of the industry focus and e-commerce focus. Last mile. So it's been actually a big challenge. It still is a large challenge. Maybe in Singapore a little bit less, but still is. In the other markets definitely more. The more islands you have, the bigger problem it is.
I agree.
Do you feel this is probably one of the biggest challenges for the e-commerce growth? What do you think about last mile delivery?
Last mile used to be the main hindrance, 8-9 years ago, that was really the challenge, because the only real last mile you had kind of available were the postal players, which outside of Singapore kind of had challenges, and the very high-priced integrators, the FedEx, the DHLs, and the UPS, and none was actually able to really match it. I think since then a lot has happened, the postal players has beefed up their capabilities. You have kind of new products coming in even from the integrators, and then there are a lot of startups who basically started to fill up in the middle. Is it perfect yet? No, certainly not. As you rightfully say, the more islands, the more problems and the more challenges. So I believe further investment and I think a bit of a consolidation in the industry would help the development in e-commerce a lot in Southeast Asia. So I think that's one. So that you basically have sustainable companies that really put up the infrastructure versus a lot of startups that basically grow and go bust, because you have a lot of churn also even in Singapore. The other big one is obviously kind of the G2G, the government-to-government kind of rules on importation, on duties, and how you basically create this. I've been talking about it for a while, the green channel for e-commerce within ASEAN. I think that would really rapidly see, because if companies in any part of ASEAN could access 600 million consumers by not having to wait, for 2 weeks for customs clearance and intransparent kind of rules, obviously not in Singapore, but outside of it, I think that would be a huge boost. And that could be, this X10 event that could really kind of drive the e-commerce industry to the next level.
Yeah, and I know that they're working and there's different ASEAN summits on this topic, but probably it will be a while longer before it gets done.
I'm a big advocate of a pragmatic pilot. Take 2 countries and make it happen, and then everyone will see the benefits.
Yes. Moving on to the talent side and to the human resources and basically the engine behind the growth of a lot of companies, right? What's your main challenges when it comes to finding the right talent to push Luxasia forward into the future?
That's clearly the toughest part, at the same time the most rewarding part. As a CEO, sometimes my colleagues are surprised when I say I spend 70-80% of my time on talent. But it's a fact because, at the end of the day, you need to have a team in place, and the team needs to have teams in place that understand where you're going. If it's basic business as usual, and if people understand the transformation to say, oh yeah, I'll just come to the office, in a different way, and I talk a little bit, but when I go back to my cubicles, I still do the same work, they will all fail. So basically the motivation of the team, the assessment of the team, the bringing in of new talents is key. Someone recently told me also that he believes, talent attraction is now more important than talent retention. I think that's quite a radical thought, I would say. But there is a point behind it, because you can see, especially as a distributor like us, where you are basically developing people in multifaceted areas, in a lot of different areas, we also been seen as a training ground, for some of the big beauty companies, that then pick some of our players. So for us, it's very important to have a pipeline of people to basically come in and join what we call the Luxasia family or the Luxasia movement, to basically have that ability to work across. So for us, it's top priority, talent attraction. We also basically change the way we communicate with talents now. We make it much more open, much faster, the decision process, much less hierarchical. We put in share option programs, for a private company, quite a step, that people feel more entrepreneur. So we want to put the whole environment in place. We have now just invested quite some amount to change our Singapore office. We have no more enclosed offices, which means everyone is sitting outside. Also to showcase, hey guys, we are one team. And so we're putting everything in place so that talents basically can see, hey, there's a great company that is basically playing in a field that I like, beauty, and we recently expanded into luxury. We're doing our jewelry and other areas. So there's a luxury kind of company that basically is looking for talents and is ready to invest into them. But having said that, it's still not very easy. It's tough, convincing people, making sure that people are also happy when they come in, because our pace is very, very high. We're basically pushing very, very hard. And as such, it is why I'm spending 70-80% of my time on that.
And let's talk about your direct leadership team. What are the qualities and the skills and the attributes that you're looking for in them?
For me, the most important is mindset. I'm not so worried about the capabilities. We can train it up, especially at the top level. Yes, of course, if you run a supply chain function or if you're CFO, it's good if you know accounting or certain views. But, I think that's a hygiene level. The rest, basically, the remaining 80% is about the mindset. And the mindset we are looking for is people who are courageous, who are ready to step up, who are ready to make mistakes, who are ready to basically also stand to those mistakes. So it's the combination of courage and taking accountability that we're looking for, where people come in and say, I want to change something, I will do it, and I will let you know kind of if something goes wrong. And on the other hand, between digital and physical, we also want to see there are now more leaders that basically understand there's a bridge between both. We don't need leaders that are pure physical. We don't need leaders that are pure digital. People who start to understand it's actually one and find those bridges and then can articulate them to their teams, that people say, okay, just making a social media campaign alone is not enough. I then need to make sure that activation is translated also on the retail floor and the other way around. And so for us, it's really about that mindset of courage and taking accountability and pushing the boundaries, as well as understanding that digital physical is one. And I think this is then those leaderships that we really harness and want to make sure that they become part of our leadership team.
Mm. And you like to call yourself, or you prefer to call yourself, a Chief Transformation Officer. Tell us a little bit, why do you like this title, and how does it impact your business?
A side story there, we now basically wanted to make sure that all our people in our company understand that we have an inverted pyramid. So we basically renamed all our people, our 1,000 over fragrance and beauty advisors in the retail stores, CEOs, Chief Engagement Officers. They were at the beginning, they were quite kind of scared about the title, but the good thing is now at least, I have a about 1,000 CEO colleagues in my company, which is very helpful. Now, coming back to the Chief Transformation Officer title or whatever one may call it, I think it's more something where I want to signal to the company that transformation, and especially digital transformation, cannot be parked in a corner office on the side with a Chief Digital Officer, Chief Transformation Officer, something else. It needs to be the CEO. Because if it's not role modeled, if it's not lived every single day in all the decisions you make, you will not be able to transform, at least in my humble opinion. And that's why I basically always say I'm much more transformation officer than executive officer, because I need to make sure that the company stays on track and constantly challenge itself to say, every single day to say, hey, what can we do different today? How can we challenge ourselves? How can we make sure that the consumer really understands we are there for them?
And how do you? This is an interesting setup that you're in, right? Because obviously the owner, Mr. Chong, is somebody that has groomed the business, has grown the business. Some of his family help you in running the business. It's an interesting dynamic. How do you perceive it as operating within a family business, and what's your experience of it so far?
So, very good experience. Patrick is someone I'm learning a lot from. Because in Patrick's word, he also said, we are a perfect combination, because, he really knows the beauty and retail industry in Asia like no one else. And I'm learning every day kind of how really the dynamics are in each location, each country, and how the different brands interact. And at the same time, I can bring in that digital transformation mindset, and together we are really aiming to make Luxasia an even greater company. And I think with that also in tandem is that the family, the employees, everyone understands that kind of there is an absolute unity on the top between the chairman and the CEO to say, hey, let's do something great. Well, let's put the money where our mouth is. We also basically put a lot of money into investments, building up a completely new CRM team. We have over 40 people in digital now, For a private company, quite a lot of people, And basically saying we're going down that train, and we're basically making sure that Luxasia kind of is transforming into the new age. And I think if you have a common purpose and a trust, I think it can work very, very well.
Thanks for sharing. Talking about leadership, what do you think is, and you talked about transformation, but apart from transformation, what is another characteristic that you believe every leader should possess?
As I said before, for me, it's about courage, but taking responsibility or accountability. Because one doesn't work without the other. Just a courageous person that rolls everything off doesn't work. And someone who basically says, I'll do everything, but doesn't have the courage to train it, it's there. Why am I saying that? Because management under uncertainty, is now a norm. It used to be kind of at business school, kind of one of these management, I even forgot all the different terms, but it was one, the last one typically mentioned. It's now everything. You don't know, in the beauty industry, which beauty brand will succeed in the next year. They have very different trajectories depending on which celebrity endorses them or what the innovation pipeline is. You don't know how the consumers are moving. You don't know the geopolitical risk. Now kind of with the challenges we have between China and the US, which suddenly kind of import taxes and everything else. So every day is a new day. And so you need people who basically take the responsibility to say, okay, I'm here to make the decision. I'm not waiting for someone to cover everything. I'm making it, I go out and make it within the values of that company with the best interest of the company at heart. And if things go wrong, I'll tell everyone, because then together we can problem solve. And I think if you get that spirit, you can move very, very fast.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of add on the point, right? Because you talked about transformation, you talked about changing. But what does it actually take to change culture and to have that buy-in for transformation? Because again, when you're talking about big organizations, it's not easy, right? It's not easy as it does take time.
It takes a lot of time. I was saying kind of mindset change is not done in 2 to 3 years. It's a 5 to 7 year journey, until basically everyone understood why. The core ingredient for any human being to change is to understand the why. Why are we changing? What's the urgency? And so you need to articulate in each kind of different company. And in our setting, it was clear that we're saying, hey, the industry around us is completely changing. The consumer is changing. The retail industry is changing. The brands are changing by themselves. So if we don't change, if you don't come much more attuned to digital, if you're more open and understand the consumer better, at one point in time, no one needs a distributor anymore, And so that's something you need to get in everyone's mind, that there is an urgency. It's not just because we woke up and said, hey, let's transform. It's basically because the industry is telling us. And then very clearly, with that urges, you need to make sure, why should people stay? Because they could say, well, they're great. You're transforming. I want a normal job. I go somewhere else. So you need to make it clear how people can learn and grow within such a transformation, which I've seen, in several kind of the situations I've been before, where people over 3-4 years became completely different leaders and were able to do completely different things because they were empowered much more than they would not, because it was a transformation. They were thrown into cold water and were able to swim very, very fast. And so you have to make sure that there is something. The question was, what's in it for me? So you really need to address it and make sure people understand it. And I think if you put those both together into a story that people start to understand, and you repeat it maybe 1 million times, that's basically when mindset starts to happen. But at the very end of all is the role modeling. If at the top it's not role model, the way you want all these values and this new change to happen, it will never happen. So you need to make sure that you're basically on the ball and an example for the change.
Yes. And I think, that's just to add a few thoughts from our perspective as executives search and as consultants to companies. That's where a lot of organizations fail, because there's a lot of lip service to the change, but there's not actually leadership teams following the change and walking the talk every day. You have 2 journeys, right? You have 2 journeys very close to Asia, actually very close also to Singapore. You have the SingPost journey. Now you're on the journey with Luxasia. You've been in Asia for a long time. How have these particular 2 companies and 2 being the CEO of these 2 groups so far shaped your own thinking?
A lot, because, when you come over and you still work in a multinational environment, it's different than really working in Asian companies, And, I'm very grateful for the time here in Asia, because not only kind of business-wise, it's super to be in a region that is growing constantly, in all matters, but it's also kind of learning from the Asian culture on how to resolve conflict, on how to basically talk with each other, on how to basically preserve the face and thinking through that, and then combining it with some of that Western kind of thinking that you have about kind of transparency and direct access. I think made it really fun for me to work in that environment, and I'm learning every single day. And I personally believe it made me a better manager, because I'm basically have 2 parts and 2 hearts and 2 brains now, always deliberating, when you go into a discussion to think through. And I think a bit more reflection on how you do things are certainly helpful, especially if you come with a Western European kind of mindset.
Final question for the younger parts of our audience, people that are graduating, students or young MBA graduates. What would be a piece of advice that you would give them if they wanted to have a successful career in a multinational setup or in a company like Luxasia?
For me, very simple: experiment at the early stages in your career. Really find out what you like to do. Don't be shy and don't be too afraid of changing jobs, or trying out different environments. Find the environment you're best in, because once your passion is locked in, everything else takes care of himself. So I think I'm mentoring quite a few students, in my alma mater, the University of Exeter and so forth. And they're always saying, but there's the big firms and companies and so forth. And I said, but try it out. Trust me. Now, having been in the workforce for a while, kind of close to 20 years, I'm saying, once, in 10 years, it's not that easy to change. It's still possible, but you are at the stage of a career where you can really try everything out. Have the confidence. Bright people will always get a job and always have fun, but once you find your passion, that's when it really clicks.
Yes. Thank you. Well, Wolfgang, it's been a very insightful sharing. Thank you for all the examples and the good information and the good news that you've shared with us. And we wish you and Luxasia a great journey ahead.
Thank you, Radu. Really enjoyed it. Yeah?
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to follow us on radupalamario.com/podcast for all the show notes, links, and extra tips covered in the interview. Make sure also to subscribe to our emailing list to get the news in the nick of time. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes or Stitcher and you like what we do, please kindly review and give us 5 stars so we can keep the energy flowing and get more people to find out about our podcast. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me to stay tuned for our latest articles as well as as future guests for the podcast. And if you have any suggestions or any other idea, please feel free to write to me. I respond to all. And also, please make sure not to miss our next episode, where we will be having a few other C-level and top leaders in supply chain joining us. Stay tuned.